Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monty Sylvan, and I'm the membership coordinator here at AdvaMed. Today, we have a wonderful presentation lined for you today in partnership with Sunrise Labs. Today, we will be discussing the innovation and safety, the unique challenges of complex safety critical medical device development. We have our presenters today, Eric Soederberg, President and CEO of Sunrise Labs, Tracey Wielinski, President and CEO of Qualtra Consulting, as well as Steve Gemmell, an independent medtech consultant. I will ask that you ask any questions that you may have in our Q&A section and not the chat. And if you do place in the chat, I'll just kindly guide you to the Q&A just so we can all view the questions appropriately. I am now going to hand this over to Eric, and they will get started. Eric.
Wonderful. Great. It's wonderful to be here with you all. This is a great topic, and it's great to be here with Steve and Tracey, who have both a lot of scars and learning to do things the right way and the wrong way. You're learning how to do things the right way by doing them the wrong way. Even had some experience working together with Steve on some neat projects, but that's how we learn, and we're hoping to share that learning with you today. So, anyway, I'm the CEO of Sunrise Labs. About 15 years ago, I took control of Sunrise and focused us exclusively on medical devices, and so we're an engineering services firm in Bedford, New Hampshire, an hour north of Boston, where we develop and help our clients develop medical devices. Steve?
Yeah, hey, everyone. My name's Steve Gemmell. I have over 20 years experience in medical device product development and commercialization, including many VP and leadership roles in R&D and operations at Insulet Corporation, Onduo, Cytrellis Biosystems, Haemonetics, and multiple startups. I actually started my career as a system software engineer and have designed and launched several innovative products in markets like diabetes, technology, drug delivery, and surgical.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracey Wielinski. I'm the president and CEO of Qualtra Consulting. Qualtra is a boutique consulting firm located in the greater Boston area, and we specialize in regulatory, quality, and clinical affairs for medical devices and combination products. So it's nice to be here with all of you.
Great. So I'll jump right in. It's first question is, what's special about developing a safety critical or complex medical device? So if we contrast an over-the-counter blood pressure cuff, let's say, to an artificial heart. Okay, the over-the-counter blood pressure cuff is there's hundreds of models out there on the shelf in your drugstore to go out and buy at any time. So it's a mature market. We know what the requirements are for it. We know what it takes to sell one, and if you're going to differentiate yourself on it, it's going to be in ease of use or something. But the technology is well understood, and one of the main differences here is that if it fails, puts an X on the screen or something, you're not going to hurt anyone, or it's very unlikely you can hurt somebody. You can argue that a bad reading would, but it's a failure. You just go pick up another one and run that. So an artificial heart, on the other side, it's probably you're doing a lot of new and novel things, okay? And each one of these things sort of adds more risk to that product development process. It's you still have all the market risk. Is it going to be a success in the market? That's a huge risk, right, for any device or any product at all, really. But on top of those, you've got this, when a fault happens in the system, you got to keep operating, or you might kill someone, in the case of the artificial heart, there's no predicate, that does it quite the way you do it, or that means that it's a less established, not just the market needs. We don't know, how long should the battery last? What does it have to, as a driver, does it have to work in the shower? The regulatory pathway, it's probably, it's a PMA, but what claims are we going to make, and what kind of validation will that incur? So a lot of new questions there. There's often a lot of subsystems involved in a complex device. There's the batteries, that could be the motors, could be the balancing system or brain, and the user interface, and all these things you have to make decisions on. Do I use existing things that are out there that I can purchase off the shelf and put them together, or do I? Where's the secret sauce that I really want to keep and develop ourselves here, and completely own? And so the technology itself may be doing things. There may be a new some kind of material that lasts a long time without blood clotting onto it or something. There may be things related to the battery technology, or to keep it small and light. You may be using a bleeding edge technology there. And so that's an added risk. And of course, these are very complex devices, take a lot of money to develop and time. So it's a big investment. So in summary, it's sort of, you have a lot of risks, and it's a high stakes game here because of the expense. So when those are the conditions, this is just one thing to keep in mind is even if those risks, you have a lot of risks and they all look small, they don't add, they multiply. And so the probability of success for your project gets pretty small when you take risks in a lot of different areas. And so really the message here is to pick your battles, and don't take risk where you don't have to. So to do that, we'll talk a lot more about the foundation. You've got to figure out what it is you really want to build. What are the constraints, and minimum viable product? What are the things it has to do? And so if it's the first of its kind on the market, maybe you don't need all the web connectivity. Maybe there's some things you can where you can get rid of some project risk by just not doing that in the first generation. And you really need to be careful about watching those risks, and tracking them as you go through the project, and retiring the risks as soon as possible. Build prototypes, test them. Attention to detail, absolutely. You got to do it right. Taking shortcuts for a complex device, and especially a safety critical one, will almost certainly take longer. The shortcuts may look short, but there's often a lot of pressure here. So it starts with figuring out, at the real base level here, what are those market needs? Who are the stakeholders? What's the target patient population? What's the price point you need to get to be viable in that market? Regulatory, what are the claims you're going to make? Huge question to weigh out, versus the validation required for them. The 510K or PMA, what are the consensus standards that will be required to be met to get through the regulatory bodies, the FDA clearance or approval? Technologies, you're probably pushing a technology in one area, but there may be other places where you don't have to push the state of the art. So is the stuff that you're working with here something out of a research laboratory that hasn't been proven yet, or is it mature? And those we use a technology readiness level scale, a numerical scale that based on sort of what NASA's done to determine sort of what level of risk is there to the project by going with certain technology choices. User-centered design, what are the use cases that are most that are most pertinent to this, and the user experience? What are you going after? How are you? Do you want to be the easiest thing to use, the thing that does the most things? What do you want to be? And all those things, the decisions and trade-offs made among these first four pillars sort of feed into the defining that minimum viable product, which I spoke to a second ago. It's so important to, choose your risks carefully. So this is a foundation, but it has to start fluid. Example, the first medical device I worked on was 25 years ago, class 3 medical device. It's the iBot, we didn't call it a wheelchair, but mobility system that would take a person with disabilities and put them up at eye level by balancing them on two wheels. Okay. And it did climb stairs and did some other things too. But, marketing would come in and say, hey, it's got to hold a 350-pound payload. And, on a battery charge, it has to last for a week. And the product has to weigh less than 125 pounds and cost less than $250. And, it's like, okay. And engineering says, well, with the technology available today, we can, we can hit $2,500 and maybe a 300-pound machine to do this. What if we back it down to a 250-pound payload and 1 day of battery life? And back and forth it goes. User-centered design says, hey, you know what, this has to work in the shower. It's crazy for it not to. How else are the people going to get in and out of the shower? So it's this cross-functional negotiation that you want to do right up front to figure out what is real important to get into that minimum viable product. Another recent example is an implanted monitor that wants to monitor a certain body function continuously, and in order, but for the use case, continuously means, yeah, if I got it a couple times a day, it would be enough. But our predicate, this is where the regulatory piece comes in. But the predicate does it like every 10 seconds. So we have to be at least as good as the predicate, or a 510K is going to fall apart. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens among all four of these, and it's a great time to do it is early, and then before you detailed design starts and you start investing a lot of money in a path that may be changing. So that's the main message we want to send today. It's just this. It sometimes there's a lot of pressures coming, from above or from wherever to move quickly. But this is how you move quickly by doing this up front, and avoid features that sound good, they'd be really cool, but they're not core to what you're really trying to do. That's the foundation we're talking about. Then when you get into actually implementing the design, there's just a plethora of trade-offs. The architecture is the first thing. This is the floor built on top of the foundation. Okay, and this is where you're really, Steve's going to talk more about system architecture, but I'll just talk to just this, if you just look at the safety sort of element of the system architecture, I just want to give you a feel for how complex this can get, how you really want to be working with experts that have done this before, and they're also familiar with the present state of the art and what you can, what technologies you can apply that are off the shelf that will work for you. But just the safety part of this requires a semester course to introduce it. It's what parts of the system need to be fail safe, what parts can be fault operative, what parts just have to be robust. There's fault tree analysis, things you get into, look at probabilities of this happens, then this happens, and that results in harm. There's FMEA's aerospace really invented much of the science behind this safety stuff, but it is a science, and it's important to engage people who are familiar with the science here for the safety piece. So that's again, Steve will talk more to the system architecture. I just wanted to hit a little bit on how important that piece is and complex that part is. Prototype. Let me just run, and Steve will also talk about hazard analysis. Prototyping is a real interesting as you're planning a project. I talked about retiring risks. This is one way to retire risks, is to build a little prototype that says, well, you know what, this battery hasn't been tested at this temperature with this kind of load profile. Well, go take a battery and put it in the refrigerator, whatever it is, and test it with that load profile and see what happens. You can do one-offs. So each prototype you build should have, you know, a why behind why are you doing that, and then you should stick to that plan, because you know we've had examples where we're building a prototype to test to make sure all the system components of an optical device that looks in your eye. Let's see if that that system's all going to play together with this microprocessor, and you know, if we get everything done we think we can with this technology, and then it's like, well, why don't you just package it into a handheld, because it's kind of small anyway, and why don't you make it look pretty so I can, you know, show that to the board of directors and they can see, hey, look at this, I got a working device here, and and then it ends up, you know, taking an extra 2 months and costing twice as much, and you're kind of like, what happened? And it happens often stick by stick thing. It becomes a big pile of things. Everything's interrelated in a complex system. So when you change something in one place, it affects things in 3 other places. So that's just something to keep in mind is have a plan, stick with it. It's not waterfall versus agile. When you get to the process side, it's a combination. If you've got, you know, obvious one is a graphical user interface, that's agile. You want to put it in front of people and iterate on it. Okay, and but building a foundation is kind of waterfall by definition. So keeping that cross-functional team that helps you decide what you know, among the pillars, what was most important. There's going to be surprises that come up as you go and execute. This product development is about learning. It's never been done before. You're doing it for the first time. You need that cross-functional team engaged to keep you agile and moving forward, and making decisions quickly. So with that, I'll hand it to Steve.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Great stuff. So what's next? I'll start with just pointing out a pretty standard V diagram of product development steps and how they stem from a good understanding of requirements through different design stages and how they relate to verification and validation. But you know, the emphasis here is on the product requirements, and they come from many sources, and not all of them are obvious, right? You know, first I want to highlight the idea of user studies, and this is beyond marketing survey information. For a product that is solving a complex problem, especially solving it in a new way, or introducing a paradigm shift, you need to make sure you understand how your users will respond to the product and to the change in workflow that you're introducing. And I think back to early days at Insulet when we were just conceiving of the first disposable insulin pump, the patch pump that became Omnipod. Yeah, we had a remote controlled user interface that would not always be with the user while the pump is pumping. And it was a big leap from the current use model for insulin pumps. And so we ended up executing an extensive user study with people with type 1 diabetes. We built and verified a fully functional version of it, and we learned a ton. We learned about the features of the product, the use cases, what people liked and did not. And it was really the best thing we could have done before we committed to a much larger scale development product. Another area that is often not well defined relates to a clear definition of product reliability and performance expectations, things like the useful life of the product. And this is really fundamental to the whole value proposition in the market strategy. What are we doing differently than what's in the market? You know, so you think about what is the true expected life of the device. You have to work out, is it 2 years? Is it 4 years? 6 months? How many uses per day, per week? They're not easy answers to come up with, but the answer should not be, well, let's wait, you know, let's conduct reliability testing at the end of the project. Let's see how it turns out and come up with our warranty cost and service strategy. That's not what you want it to be. You've got to make it a priority to define this and relate it to all of your target markets and your cost structure. And And so what, just that element of the project is a tall order, right? I mean, you've got to, there's always going to be resource constraints on what your team is able to execute. So you've got to be realistic, not overly optimistic. And so with that, I say, reach out to experts. If there's areas of your design where you're pushing the envelope in electronics or software or cybersecurity, if you don't in your company have expertise in biocompatibility, design for manufacturability, UX, whatever it is, for a complex product that is safety critical and undoubtedly is crucial to your company's success, it really isn't the time for you to DIY it and start trying things where the stakes are so high. Next slide, Eric. So for any medical device product and project, everything we do, of course, has to be centered in the safety of the patient and the operator of the device. And so clearly you need to make sure that your team has the expertise in risk management, hazard analysis, and it really, really must inform your architecture design at a fundamental level. More on that later. We're probably all used to the typical tools in risk management. Eric mentioned a couple, like a suite of FMEAs, like a design FMEA, process FMEA, use FMEA, or URRA, as Tracey, I know we'll discuss a bit later. Just to touch on this a little bit, look, best practice, we probably all know, focuses on ensuring that you're looking at design mitigations that will address or eliminate key failures and failure modes rather than passing along the burden of mitigation to manufacturers, to your manufacturing group, or to your suppliers, or worse yet, to your users, via labeling and warning screens. You've really got to have a cross-functional team working on these. But I wanted to also highlight kind of beyond the safety risk part of this, right? If you look at FMEAs, they tend to highlight, and prioritize areas to focus on, right? I mean, really, it's a project management tool of sorts that's focused on safety. But what I've seen is that often this process misses an opportunity to simultaneously highlight and evaluate business risks associated with failure modes. For example, like in your system, if an alarm is properly generated and prevents a hazardous situation, that's a good thing, right? That's what you're going for. That line in your FMEA is going to be in the green, and typically the team moves on. But if you think about the flip side of that, if the process of recovering from that alarm, like a reboot, changing out a disposable, calling customer service, whatever it is, if that is onerous, the procedure could be delayed, resulting maybe in a rescheduled appointment, unhappy customers. There's a lot of downside. It's not just victory because you've detected an error. So how do we programmatically address these as well? My recommendation is actually to amend the process, like an FMEA process a bit, to actually consider non-safety issues associated with these same failure modes. And you can actually have an additional ranking and RPN values for these items. And after you've done through the safety items, you can review that same list and the RPNs of the business risk items through a different lens with perhaps even a different group, but really looking at the business risk side of it. And that can be applied to reliability issues. It can be applied to supply chain or other items that might affect the business. And then the other area I just want to highlight that's critical to the early stages of the product development in the area of risk is cybersecurity. The cybersecurity risk management, which is even now more highly scrutinized by FDA, right? I think we all know cybersecurity weaknesses in a product can introduce both patient safety risks and business risks. And you really got to get that work started early and make sure your team has deep cybersecurity expertise on board. And if necessary, utilize consultants.
Yeah, and I think Tracey will tell you also aren't going to get cleared through the FDA without it.
So some other items I'd like to highlight with respect to complex devices are in the category of project management and oversight. And Eric touched upon some of this. A project to develop safety critical product often, has feasibility activities, and something that teams really need to do. And, I'm talking to my fellow engineers out there, is resisting the temptation of going too far in feasibility and cranking into the design without really solidifying like all of the pillars, that Eric mentioned. In the feasibility side, you got to understand specifically, what are we trying to de-risk? What is this feasibility work doing? What question are we trying to answer? Is it related to power, to speed, noise, and algorithm, whatever it is? You got to answer that question. Get back to the team on that. Because the more complex a system is, the more likely you are to have a larger team, which then makes communication more difficult. So, one way to address this is to ensure that you're creating documentation for the product prospectively in real time, right? I think we've all been part of projects where the documentation catches up at the end, but you've got to, in a safety critical device, document that overall system architecture, the software architecture, theory of operations, calculations between critical electronic circuits, tolerance analysis. That's got to be documented early so you can double check your architecture. And what I'm always on the lookout for is design trade-offs that are being made within a discipline without really involving the cross-functional team. And why I highlight that is because the reality of designing any complex product is that time is always the enemy. And when people start falling behind, they start looking for ways to simplify. Hey, do we really need that sensor to monitor the pressure or the flow or noise or whatever? Isn't that redundant? Couldn't we save time and money with a software algorithm? Or, we've got a working prototype. Can't we just move ahead with these electronics? Watch out for those moments in the project. They're coming. And decisions that are made, trade-offs that are made in the dark without the full team, are typically revisited later in V&V and production via delays, or in the field, which is even worse. One way to align on the architecture risks and project risks in these systems is through critical integration points, right? These should really be as early as possible, to the point that often they become painful. It should really challenge the team. And sometimes you get, well, wait a minute, aren't we just redesigning the whole system faster? Isn't that what you're asking? Like, no, really, it's not a full working system. That's the goal of some of these integration points. This is a demonstration of some of the key use cases that touch multiple subsystems from end to end. That's really the goal. And then the final item in this area that I'd like to highlight is related to pilot manufacturing, because the more complex or innovative that something is, the more likely you're breaking new ground. And this might rely not just on design, it could be related to innovating manufacturing processes, either in-house or at a vendor. You're pushing a vendor to do something that stretches the limit of manufacturability. So I would just say, ensure you have manufacturing engineers on the project early on, and create, for most products, create an in-house pilot line as soon as possible, because you're going to learn every time that you build. Next. Yeah. So which brings me on to V&V, which is a real complex, of a complex system. It's a massive undertaking, and it typically represents a huge risk to project execution. And so to that, I would say, really, you have to begin planning for V&V at the beginning of the project. And it starts with strong requirements. I would say invest in a requirements management tool. There are many out there. Invest in a tool and focus on writing testable requirements. And it also emphasizes a strong architecture that can leverage some subsystem testing. If you're thinking about subsystem testing early on, it's going to dramatically help you in many areas. I mean, number one, it helps you decouple dependencies in your schedule, right? If one subassembly is ready to test, you can get going on that, independently testing that, kind of ahead of rather than serial doing everything. But I think even more importantly, it aids in regression testing. Because if you have a subassembly, you need to make a change to a component or an algorithm, and it's late in the game, and you will, right? There will be something that comes up. If you have strong traceability and subassembly level testing, you can have confidence in the impact of your change and make a very strong case for a focused regression testing. And then the other area I'd say about V&V is that your results should not come as a surprise. And what I mean by that is do dry runs early, especially if you need to go out of house for compliance testing to standards like electrical compliance and immunity, drop testing, ship testing, human, all those things. You want to know as soon as possible if your product gets put in a strange state when subjected to electrical interference or vibration or extreme temperatures. You want to know that, understand those states, and you also want to understand the point of failure of your design. For example, if when doing electrical compliance testing, there's different thresholds, say for ESD, static discharge exposure. And if you pass, that's great, but I'd say don't stop there. I would say keep going beyond the spec and find the weaknesses in your design and find the breaking point. Because I remember many years ago doing work on a wearable medical device that met all the immunity standards for ESD, yet we still had field failures that we traced back to ESD. And we soon realized that some of the electrostatic discharge events that you would see in the dead of winter, cold, dry air, for people wearing wireless medical devices, wearables, underneath a fleece or something like this, or better yet, one of the most fascinating ones was a child wearing a wearable medical device and going down a plastic slide on a playground, generate massive ESD events that are way beyond the standards. So test beyond the standards, really understand your environment. And then the last item I would say related to V&V is that one of the great pains is finding ways to subject your device to all of the exception cases and how you capture data demonstrating proper performance. And so I would really focus on building a system and tools that support data extraction, support automated testing, support scripting, especially something ultimately that can be used by a technician and not a senior engineer only. These will help for informal debugging and development, but also informal V&V and possibly even in production. You just have to be prepared to validate the subset of those tools that you're using. Next, please. And then so, finally we get to maintaining complex systems, right? You finish V&V, you've got regulatory clearance to launch, you've built commercial products. So now be prepared to change it, because change is going to happen, whether you want to or not. Why? All it takes is a single supplier of a single component to not be able to keep up with production volumes or tolerances or timelines, and boom, you're now evaluating spec adjustments, alternative materials, qualifying new suppliers. Change will come from that and also from the field. You inevitably get feedback from the field, which may or may not be accurate, reporting issues, suggesting changes. So how do you manage all that? What I would say first, don't underestimate the amount of time and effort and expertise it'll take to maintain your design, support production, support suppliers, debug field issues. You need a cross-functional team. You need quality. You need regulatory, clinical, manufacturing, supply chain, sustaining engineering. It's got to be collaborative. What level of V&V do we need to repeat? Do we need a new 510K? Fundamentally, you need a strong sustaining engineering process, SOP, strong change control process are critical. But you also need a way to filter through the information that you're getting to understand, well, okay, we heard this report. but how is the product really performing? You need a way to collect the data, and hopefully, given the complexity of the product and the safety critical nature of the product that you've designed, you've anticipated this. You've implemented critical data logs within the devices in the field that are captured automatically. You have a way of automatically transmitting the data. You have a way to parse and analyze and present the data in a dashboard so that people besides a single engineer can look at that data. And this all gets back to the initial requirements. Build this functionality into your requirements at the beginning. Make sure you have a strategy for how you will deal with the product changes that are being made. If we need over-the-air software updates or special service mode, service tools, service depot, all of that strategy goes back to phase one. Plan for it so that you're not scrambling to invent new processes and tools when that first complaint comes in. And so I'll end it just saying, the systems engineer, the systems lead, project lead, has to be exploring the needs of the entire product life cycle at the start of the project, not just the functional specs.
Great point, Steve. Thank you. Tracey.
Hi, everybody. So building off of Eric and Steve's comments regarding strong foundations, I want to just spend a little bit of time and talk about regulatory strategy. So there are several pieces that contribute to a strong strategy. We're going to talk about each of those. And this should really serve as your playbook through the development process. And the real cornerstone of all of this is communication and collaboration. And so both internally and externally, you want to make sure, as Steve has said, that you're talking cross-functionally with throughout your design team. So that's really important. Next slide.
Yep, sorry.
That's okay. So the first piece is really defining your regulatory pathway. So for those of you that are in the regulatory field, you know that the first piece that you really want to understand is your device classification and the regulations that your safety critical device might comply with. And so I think Eric said, maybe it was Steve, what claims are you looking for? And what does your company really want to come away with claims for this device? And so that's, just another piece of your regulatory strategy. But one of the things you need to consider is your device a novel device? And there are some really great programs for novel devices. And so if you should consider whether or not you can use the Breakthrough Designation Request program. And for those of you that are not familiar with that, there's a great guidance document that walks you through what the criteria are. And it's really great for kind of expediting the process for breakthrough technologies. If your device doesn't qualify for the breakthrough designation, maybe it qualifies for the Safer Technology Program or the STEP program. And so again, there are guidance documents that can walk you through that. The STEP program is really used for improvements of safety and currently available treatments, whereas the breakthrough designation is for something really brand new and novel. Another piece that you need to consider is, are there any special controls for the type of device that you are developing? And so examples of that might be special labeling or safety assurance cases, or are there additional performance tests that need to be done? And so that all needs to go into your regulatory strategy. So during the development of safety critical devices, it's really important to understand how the user is going to interact with this device and the environment in which the device is going to be used. So I really can't, I can't stress that enough. I think Steve's already talked about it, because use-related errors have led to hundreds of thousands of deaths since 2000. And so if you think about that, that's really incredible. The FDA has published a list of safety critical devices, so ventilators, infusion pumps, insulin delivery systems, defibrillators, those kind of devices that require human factors testing as part of the submission. So the FDA has recognized that these safety critical devices are important because they have clear potential for serious harm from use error. So manufacturers have been encouraged to engage with the Office of Device Evaluation to obtain feedback on their human factors testing and their protocols to ensure that there's adequate attention given to the usability of the device in its use environment by the actual users. So, human factors is just so critical when you're talking about safety critical devices. So with devices becoming more interconnected, they're also more vulnerable for safety breaches. So Steve kind of touched on this as well. So how will this affect your device and patient safety? So you need to really work with your internal teams and your external experts to fully understand the potential for these breaches. You may have heard about the cyber security hacking of insulin pumps and pacemakers in the mid 2000s. And the FDA, because of that, FDA and the safety critical device manufacturers were really called on the carpet to ensure that their devices remain safe during use. And so out of that came a lot of new guidance documents that would help strengthen the testing requirements of software and Bluetooth enabled devices. So when you're developing your regulatory strategy, you want to make sure that you have a full understanding of what your device is going to be doing and what guidance documents, consensus standards are out there to help you get through those pieces. So with safety critical devices, especially novel devices, a manufacturer should engage with the agency as early as possible in the development process. So even if it's just presenting your device in an informational meeting, you want to make sure that you're aligning on the submission type, that you understand the clinical evaluation and the evidence that you're going to need to present in the submission. And all of those interactions are going to reduce your frustration, they're going to reduce cost, and ultimately they're going to expedite your timelines. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about infusion pumps, kind of a then and now. So as Steve had mentioned, Steve and I actually worked at Insulet together. So we have our insulin delivery experience, and insulin delivery devices are actually infusion pumps. So between the early 2005 and 2009, the FDA received over 55,000, excuse me, adverse event reports. And during that same period, they had almost 90 recalls in infusion pumps across the industry, which is really incredible if you think about it in 4 years. So most of those issues were related to software defects, usability issues, and then mechanical and electrical failures. So out of that, FDA initiated what they call the Infusion Pump Improvement Initiative, and that was in 2010. And so the idea was to establish, additional requirements so that the infusion pump manufacturers understood what the agency was expecting. They called on manufacturers to facilitate device improvements, so to be proactive in addressing concerns. And they wanted to increase, general user awareness. So there's a lot of information on the FDA's website about infusion pumps because there were so many recalls. And so speaking of recalls, you may have just heard last week, BD had a recall of their Alaris pump. And it's being recalled because of compatibility issues with the monojet syringes. So it's not the same system errors or software issues or use-related errors that caused the Alaris recall in 2020, but it still brings home the point that communication and collaboration with your external suppliers and your external sources is really important when you're talking about managing the entire total product life cycle. So you want to make sure that you are, reaching out to your suppliers, understanding if they've made some changes, which generally they're supposed to tell you if they do, but so that you can incorporate that and bring that back into your design team so you can evaluate what those changes mean. So I talked just a little bit about the total product life cycle. And I just want to kind of just bring that all in, especially when we're talking about infusion pumps or insulin delivery devices. And so the total product life cycle is an excellent tool to help the development team and the regulatory team ensure that all the bases are covered. It's also a great tool if you're not using infusion pumps or insulin delivery devices, because the strategies that are in the product total or the total product life cycle are actually can be used in other safety critical devices. So the central tenet of this is really surrounding risk mitigation. So safety assurance cases, user related risk analyses, hazard analyses, all of those things start to contribute to the risk planning of your TPLC. And so from a regulatory perspective, I talked a little bit about communication and collaboration with the design and development team. And it's, again, I can't stress this enough, how important it is to reach your goals as a company for safe and effective commercial product. So working together with those teams, you're going to address issues and challenges up front as they arise. And that's really going to be important as you're commercializing this product and once it's on the market, so that you can constantly be updating it. And so lastly, I just want to touch on the point that you're not generally in full production when you need to start any of these performance tests. Your regulatory strategy should really discuss the stages of development that you're going to begin testing and the acceptance of controlled bills for testing purposes. So as an example, a manufacturer of an insulin pump might start stability testing because they might start sterilization testing on their fluid path prototype to allow the insulin stability testing to start, so that you have whether the drug properties of the insulin are being affected by your sterilization, either the length or the type of sterilization that you're doing. So you want to make sure your regulatory strategy brings in all of the total life cycle plan and all of the performance testing that you're going to be doing to make sure that you've covered everything that you're going to need going into the future. So from I wrapped mine up fairly quickly, but I just wanted to summarize all of the presentations and really into a few bullet points. So it's critical that you have a comprehensive foundation for your design and development program. You want to understand the trade-offs and the non-negotiables, as Eric mentioned, because it's paramount to your successful project. Steve talked about having strong system leads, and you want to make sure that you have a strong system lead to drive that project to commercialization. And then lastly, I hope you understood from me, for safety critical devices, communication and that collaboration internally and externally is really going to help you mitigate your risks, and it's going to drive your project and the timeline to completion. And so with that, I just thank you all for participating, and I think we can open it up for some questions.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. Great presentation so far, everyone. I have a few questions that I am prepared to ask on behalf of the audience. If you're ready, I can begin. First question we have is, how do you know when and where you need to add redundant system components to keep a system safe?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'll jump in, and if Steve or Tracey want to add to it, but it really does start with your hazard analysis, defining what you sort of define what is safe enough, and safe enough I'll back up a little, it depends upon the device, right? If you're, let's say, take a Novacure device, company on the seacoast of New Hampshire here that makes a device that radiates your brain with RF energy to kill cancer cells. If the person doesn't get that therapy, they're very likely going to die. And so you can take more risk. The safety, so one of the risk factors would be sort of, okay, you turn the volume up too high, radiate too much, and somehow damage some other brain cells, not just the cancerous ones. I think that would be your sort of level of that happening is weighed against sort of, well, what's there's a risk return there, versus if you're sort of the iBot case where you're giving somebody some mobility, but they don't want to die over trying to get from point A to point B. There were safer ways to do that. The threshold's a little lower, so the probability, so the likelihood of them falling over is getting hurt. That's not a reasonable risk to take. And so now you have to say, okay, so how do you limit the probability of that to be very small? And when you have to do that, you often have to go into doing things that are they start to get fancy. Every motor is really two motors. There's an A side and a B side, and that feeds up a chain to an A battery and a B battery. So if one battery fails or anything in that whole drive chain of fails, then there's still another one there to keep them upright. The answer, of course, is it all depends, but so it depends on both your sort of risk reward equation for the device and on what the implications are of a failure. So often what you do is you look at making it a system like the iBot, you make it immune to single point failures, and you say that across the board. That's what I need to do. If one battery cell or one transistor or one anything fails, you can't hurt somebody. And then you walk through the system and say, what's that mean? And some cases it's fault operative. Some cases it's fail safe, like the user control has two sensors on each axis, so that if it's bad or not, and if it's being held forward because it's really been commanded or not. And if you get a disagreement, you say, oh, I got a disagreement, and you stop. That's okay to stop. You can stop that and still not have somebody fall. But so there's different parts through our system. And then there's some pieces, like a wheel falls off, or they're balance posting on two wheels. One of the wheels falls off, they're going to fall over, right? So, well, I can't have two wheels on every shaft or something. So I just need to design that with enough safety margin, so it's very unlikely that a wheel will fall off or break.
Absolutely. Thank you for that response. Our next question we have is when you need to bring in outside groups or consultants to work on a project or do compliance testing, how do you manage integrating their work into your own DHF?
Steve or Tracey?
At that, I mean, I think it all depends on how your quality system is arranged and how structured it is. But what I've often seen is that, especially when it comes to compliance testing, you might write your own. You'll ask the vendor to create a report, a protocol based upon the specifics of your product, and you might need to supply some of the background material. But they'll typically use their own processes for that and generate a protocol, generate a report. And when that's delivered to you, you then have to make sure that you integrate that into your own system by following your own procedures, write your own protocol. It's kind of a wrapper, and use theirs as attachments within the document. And something similar can be done if they're writing requirements documents or something for you. You've got to, you have to make sure you're following your own process and your own design and development plan, which might call that out at the beginning. So there's lots of ways to do it.
And great. Following question. is relating to integrating reliability or other factors into the risk management process. Are you suggesting creating a new type of FMEA, and new SOP, or how do you do that?
Yeah, that's you, Steve.
I've done one too. I mean, I guess you don't necessarily need a new SOP for that. It depends what your SOP says and how you want to do it. But what I've seen that does not add overhead to your process is literally taking your standard FMEA template and adding extra columns that after you've figured out the failure modes and the effect and so forth and the severity, you can have extra columns for the severity of that problem to the business or reliability, and do your own calculation of another RPN within the same document. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a whole new SOP or anything like that. I would just make sure that ahead of time, if you're doing this, make sure you align all of your FMEAs, your process, your use, your design. You might have one specific for software and hardware as well. Align those templates ahead of time so that they all look alike, and so that you're not left with something at the end where they're all different. So
Great. All right. The next question we have is, when is the best time to begin human factors testing?
I can probably take that one.
Okay.
Sooner rather than later. So you really want to do it when you're beginning your development, because you're going to be doing formative human factors testing all the way through to learn what is and isn't working from a user perspective. And so I think Steve would agree that the more information that you have, and I believe Steve actually even spoke to this, the more information that you have during that development is going to allow you to mitigate some of the risks associated with the product. And right, if you're looking at usability, you just really want to make sure that you have all of your use groups identified and the environments in which they're going to be using that product. And so from that perspective, I do say early and often. You just want to keep doing it until you're sure that you're ready for your summative testing, which is the next thing after your formative. And you're also going to want the FDA to weigh in on those protocols, make sure that they are aligned with the FDA's expectations. Anything you want to add, Steve?
No, that sounds great and very familiar.
I just want to add that sometimes, you might want to wait till you have a certain prototype stage. Sometimes that might be the reason you are making a certain kind of prototype is to test it with the user. So it should be, there's often coordination there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. And then we have time for a couple more questions. This is another one from the audience. We have the inclusion or the statement and question, the inclusion of business risk evaluation in a FMEA exercise is intriguing. My question is, how would you establish a clear demarcation between product compliance / safety aspects from the business risks, especially during an audit?
Yeah, I think what I would suggest is that you can call out, either in your product development plan, you say, or in your SOP for your risk analysis, that you're doing this at the same time. Make it clear that typically the safety risks and what you're auditing to and what you're reporting on and doing the benefit risk analysis and the residual, all of that. You've just got to be clear what you're looking at. And so I would envision, the whole section, the first column, so to speak, of all the RPN, these are the ones you would highlight in your procedures and in your project plan, that this is what relates to the safety, and that the other areas related to business risk, and have a simple way of separating it from the compliance perspective, because this is in addition to the compliance. It is somewhat separate.
Yeah, sort of typical to have a hazard analysis. You have a certain risk there, and the way you mitigate it is with some feature of the design that becomes a requirement. and it's good to have those tagged, those safety related requirements tagged for a number of reasons. But one of them is sort of, before you go into a clinical study, you don't have to necessarily validate all your requirements, but to get through an IDE to approve a study. But you may a subset of your requirements make sense to say, okay, we've done all the safe, we've validated that all the verified, I should say, that all the safety issues are handled, and so we can tell you that we think this is safe enough to use with people now going to a clinical study, even before you do all the stuff that maybe isn't as important.
Okay. Great. And our last question for this session will be, excuse me. Breakthrough designation is only for a therapy that didn't previously exist before, or a state-of-the-art method for a therapy that already exists. But the state-of-the-art method would be a great improvement on the therapies available, ?
So I'm not sure I understand actually the question. Right, breakthrough designation is it for sure. You can have it. It's for devices that previously didn't exist, but there are exceptions for devices that you're making a big improvement, a novel improvement on a device that did exist. And it's something new in the most recent guidance document, adding the benefit for the patient. And so there is, if I understand maybe the question correctly, state of the art is from a CE perspective, a international perspective, is a great way to show that improvement. And you are expected, if your product is regulated around the world, you're expected to have all of that state of the art information to support your tech file. So you could, I guess you should. Most companies don't have two different processes. So if you're using all of that state-of-the-art methodology internally to support your international submissions, you would be doing that for your domestic submissions as well. So I'm not 100% sure I understand what the question actually is.
But we do have contact information here.
Yeah, so the person that asked it, if they want to direct, message me, that would be great.
Awesome.
And we can talk a little bit more about it.
Awesome. They just thank you for your response, and they also followed up saying that they will reach out. So on that note, I do want to thank everyone for this wonderful presentation. Steve, Tracey, Eric. I also want to thank Sunrise Labs and Qualtra Consulting for collaborating with AdvaMed on this webinar. If you all have any closing words, now's the time.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun. Please reach out if you have further questions.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, the presentation will be available shortly after to be sent out. I do encourage reaching out to our presenters today for any further questions to be answered. They would be the best resource for that. But outside of that, I hope everyone continues to have a wonderful rest of their evening. And until next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.